I spent 40 years building my empire, and hiding one secret that even my own son never knew. Everyone believed the abandoned warehouse by the marina was worthless. My son never questioned it. But the day he married a woman who cared more about money than family, everything changed. One afternoon, my foreman called me, his voice shaking. "Boss, your daughter-in-law is here. She brought a locksmith, a moving truck, and legal papers. She's breaking into the building." I smiled. Because she wasn't stealing from me. She was walking straight into the trap I had prepared years ago for the one person who would betray my family. She thought she was about to uncover a fortune. Instead, she was about to lose everything. The first thing people learned about me was that I never wasted money. The second thing they learned was that I never explained my decisions. For more than 40 years, I had built one of the largest marine equipment companies on the East Coast. Every warehouse, every office, every truck in my name had a purpose. My employees trusted my judgment, my competitors feared my patience, and my family assumed they already knew everything about my wealth. They were wrong. There was one property that nobody understood. An aging 6-story building standing quietly beside the old marina. The paint had faded years ago. Rust covered the loading docks. Broken windows reflected the ocean like empty eyes. To everyone else, it looked abandoned. People called it a mistake. Real estate agents offered to buy it. Developers begged to tear it down. Even my accountant reminded me every year that it was costing thousands of dollars in taxes and maintenance. Every year, I gave him the same answer. No. No explanation. No discussion. Just one word. My son, Daniel, had asked about it dozens of times while growing up. "Dad, why do we still own that place? You'll understand someday." But someday never came. As Daniel grew older, he stopped asking. He believed I was simply too stubborn to let go of old property. That assumption suited me perfectly. Because the building wasn't valuable for what people thought was inside. Its value came from what people believed was inside. Rumors spread for decades. Some claimed I had hidden millions in cash after selling my first business. Others insisted there were priceless antiques stored inside. A retired employee even told people I had locked away gold bars after the financial crisis. I never denied any of it. Sometimes silence is more powerful than lies. The rumors grew larger every year. Meanwhile, only 3 people knew the truth. Me, my attorney, and my foreman, Frank. Frank had worked beside me for 32 years. He had keys to every warehouse I owned, but even he wasn't allowed beyond the steel door on the 6th floor. "Don't ever open it," I warned him years ago. "What if there's an emergency?" "There won't be." He nodded without asking another question. That's why I trusted him. Trust is earned by the questions people don't ask. Everything remained peaceful until Daniel introduced us to the woman he wanted to marry. Her name was Victoria. Beautiful. Elegant. Confident. Too confident. Within minutes of shaking my hand, her eyes wandered across my office instead of looking at me. She noticed the paintings. The safe behind my desk. The photographs of company expansions. The framed newspaper articles about my success. Most people saw memories. She saw numbers. When Daniel stepped out to answer a phone call, Victoria smiled politely. "I've heard you've invested in some incredible properties." "I've been fortunate. I especially heard about that marina building." My heartbeat didn't change. I simply smiled. People love telling stories. She leaned forward. "So, are any of them true?" I laughed softly. "If they were, I certainly wouldn't tell you." She laughed too. But her eyes never did. That was the exact moment I realized something. She wasn't curious. She was hunting. And hunters always reveal themselves, if you give them enough time. So, I decided to wait. Because karma never arrives early. It always comes exactly when betrayal believes it has already won. For the first 6 months after the wedding, Victoria played the role perfectly. She called me every Sunday. She remembered my birthday. She brought homemade desserts whenever she visited. Even my oldest friends complimented her. "You've been blessed," they would say. "Your son married a wonderful woman." I simply smiled. Experience had taught me that some people wear kindness the way actors wear costumes. Eventually, the performance ends. Daniel, however, was completely in love. My son had inherited my work ethic but not my suspicion. He believed people were as honest as as. That innocence worried me. I watched quietly as Victoria settled into our family. She asked harmless questions at first. "How many warehouses does the company own now? Which properties are rented out? Do you still invest in real estate?" Nothing unusual. At least, not yet. Then the questions became more specific. "What happens if you retire? Has your will already been written? Who will inherit the marina building?" The first time she mentioned that building again, I noticed something interesting. Daniel looked confused. "The marina building?" he asked. "Dad still owns that old place?" Victoria acted surprised. "You didn't know?" Daniel laughed. "I've never even been inside." Neither had she. But she desperately wanted to. A few weeks later, I invited them to dinner. While my housekeeper cleared the table, I walked into my study to answer a business call. The conversation lasted only 3 minutes. When I returned, Victoria wasn't in the dining room. I found her standing inside my office. She had her phone in one hand. My filing cabinet was slightly open. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh," she said with a nervous laugh. "I was just looking for the restroom. The restroom is on the opposite side of the house." Her smile didn't disappear. I must have taken the wrong hallway. Maybe. Or maybe not. I walked past her without another word and quietly closed the filing cabinet. Nothing appeared to be missing. But that night, I changed every combination, every password, and every security code connected to my business. Not because she had stolen anything. Because she had shown me she was willing to try. A month later, another strange incident occurred. Frank, my foreman, called me. "Boss, something feels off." "What happened?" "Someone came by the marina building asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "They wanted to know how often I inspect the place, whether it has cameras, and if anyone still uses it." "Did they give a name?" Frank hesitated. "No. But I recognized the woman." My grip tightened around the phone. "It was your daughter-in-law." Silence filled the line. Finally, I asked, "Did she see inside?" "No." "Good." I told her the building was condemned and dangerous. "What did she say?" Frank laughed uneasily. She smiled and said, "Every old building is hiding something." After ending the call, I drove to the marina alone. The evening fog rolled over the water, wrapping the abandoned building in silence. I stood across the street, staring at its weathered walls. Most people saw an empty warehouse. Victoria saw a treasure. That difference would become her biggest mistake. Because greed has a dangerous habit. It convinces people that every locked door is hiding riches. Sometimes, it's hiding the evidence of their own downfall. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in nearly 20 years. I visited the marina building before sunrise. The streets were empty except for a few fishermen preparing their boats. The salty breeze drifted across the docks as I unlocked the heavy iron gate. The building looked exactly as it always had, old, forgotten, and worthless. That was the illusion. Inside, however, everything was spotless. The floors had been cleaned only 2 days earlier. The electrical system still worked perfectly. Security cameras, hidden behind rusted vents and broken light fixtures, silently recorded every corner of the property. No one outside the building knew they existed. Frank was already waiting for me. "You came early, boss. I wanted to make sure everything is ready." He looked uneasy. "You really think she'll come back?" I smiled. "I don't think, Frank." "I know." He frowned. "How can you be so certain?" "Because greed doesn't give up after one closed door." We walked toward the freight elevator. It groaned as it carried us to the 6th floor. Unlike the rest of the building, the top floor was protected by a thick steel security door. Frank stopped walking. "I've worked for you for 32 years, he said quietly. "I've never asked what's behind that door." "I know. And today? Today isn't the day either." He nodded respectfully. That was why I trusted him. Loyal people don't demand answers they haven't earned. I unlocked the steel door and stepped inside alone. The room wasn't filled with gold. There weren't stacks of cash. No priceless paintings. No hidden diamonds. Instead, it contained something far more valuable. Something that could destroy lives if it ever fell into the wrong hands. I spent almost an hour inside before locking the door again. When I came out, Frank noticed the seriousness on my face. "Everything okay?" "Yes. But it's time." "Time for what?" "To let someone believe they're winning." Over the next few weeks, I began feeding the rumors. Not directly. Just enough to keep them alive. During a charity dinner, an old business associate joked loudly. "Still hiding your fortune in that marina warehouse?" Instead of laughing, I simply smiled. Across the room, Victoria noticed. A few days later, I intentionally left an old blueprint of the marina building on my office desk while Daniel and Victoria visited. I excused myself to answer another phone call. When I returned, the blueprint had been folded differently. Someone had studied it. I said nothing. A hunter who realizes it's being watched becomes cautious. I wanted Victoria to feel invisible. Then came the final confirmation. One Friday evening, Frank called again. "Boss, we have company." I looked at the clock. 8:47 p.m. "What happened?" "Our cameras caught someone driving around the building 3 times. "Did they stop?" "Yes. They took photographs of every entrance." "Can you identify them?" Frank was silent for a moment. Finally, he answered. "It was your son's SUV." My heart sank, not because I feared losing money, but because Daniel was driving. Whether he knew what Victoria was planning, I couldn't tell. I ended the call and stared out my office window. For the first time, I wasn't worried about my daughter-in-law. I was worried about my son. Because betrayal rarely destroys only the guilty. It often takes the innocent down with them. I whispered to myself. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I tried to keep you out of this." Then I picked up my phone and made one final call. "My plan begins tomorrow." The voice on the other end answered calmly. "Everything is ready." I hung up. The trap had been built years ago. Now, all it needed was for the right person to walk into it. Saturday mornings had always been predictable. I woke before sunrise, brewed my own coffee, and sat on the back porch overlooking the lake behind my house. It was the only time of the week when I allowed myself complete silence. That morning felt different. The air was heavy. My phone rested on the table beside my coffee cup. I kept glancing at it, waiting. Not hoping. Waiting. Because every decision Victoria had made over the past year had led to this exact moment. At 9:16 a.m., the phone rang. It was Frank. I answered before the second ring. "Tell me." His breathing was uneven. "Boss, she's here." "Is she alone?" "No." "Who else?" "A locksmith." I closed my eyes. "What else?" "A flatbed truck, and 2 movers." Exactly as I had expected. Frank lowered his voice. "They're unloading equipment. Bolt cutters, pry bars, they're serious." I stood and walked inside the house. "Is Daniel with her?" "No." That answer hurt more than I expected. Either Daniel had refused to come, or he had no idea what his wife was doing. "Did she show any paperwork?" "Yes." "What kind?" "She told the security guard she's acting on behalf of the family and that the property will belong to her husband anyway." I couldn't help but smile. She had already started believing tomorrow's inheritance belonged to her today. Greed always spends money it doesn't yet own. "Listen carefully, Frank." "I'm listening." "Do not stop her." There was a long pause. "Boss?" "You heard me. But she's breaking into your building." "I know. We should call the police." "Not yet." Frank sounded completely confused. "You've protected this building for decades." "I still am." "I don't understand." "You will." I ended the call before he could ask another question. Instead of driving to the marina, I went somewhere else. The office of my attorney, Richard Hayes. He had been expecting me. Without saying a word, he handed me a sealed folder. "It's all prepared." "Any problems?" "None." "And the witnesses?" "They're already in position." I nodded. Years earlier, Richard had asked me why I wanted everything arranged this way. My answer had been simple. Because betrayals show. LD never be punished by anger. It should be punished by truth. He never questioned me again. By the time I reached the marina, several people had gathered outside. Workers from nearby shops. Fishermen. Curious neighbors. Everyone was watching. Victoria stood confidently beside the locksmith, wearing expensive sunglasses and giving orders as though she already owned the place. "There," she pointed. "Open that door first." The locksmith hesitated. "Ma'am, are you absolutely sure?" "I'll take full responsibility." Those words echoed in my mind. "I'll take full responsibility." I almost laughed. People rarely understand the weight of those words until it's too late. Frank spotted my car first. He rushed over. "Boss, thank goodness." I looked toward the building. Victoria hadn't noticed me yet. She was too focused on the massive chain wrapped around the entrance. The locksmith inserted his tools. Seconds later. Click. The lock opened. Victoria smiled triumphantly. She turned toward the movers. "Start loading anything valuable." The movers stepped inside. She followed them. Without permission. Without hesitation. Without realizing that every single step had already been recorded by hidden cameras. I looked at Frank. "It's time." He swallowed nervously. "For what?" I took a slow breath. "For karma to introduce itself." Then, without raising my voice, I made one quiet phone call. "Send them in." Less than 30 seconds later. 3 black SUVs turned into the marina. And Victoria's smile slowly disappeared. The 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop in front of the warehouse. Their engines shut off at the same time. The crowd fell silent. Victoria stepped back out of the building, irritation replacing her confidence. "Who are they?" she demanded. The doors opened. Richard Hayes, my attorney, stepped out first. Behind him came 2 retired judges who now worked as independent legal witnesses, followed by a licensed court videographer. "No police." "Not yet." Richard walked toward Victoria with a calm expression. "Good morning." She folded her arms. "Who are you?" "My name is Richard Hayes." He handed her a business card. "I'm Mr. Carter's attorney." The color slowly drained from her face. She looked at me for the first time that morning. You planned this?" I answered quietly. "I planned for the day someone would mistake greed for entitlement." She laughed nervously. I don't know what game you're playing, but this building belongs to your family. It does. My husband is your only son. That's true. Then I have every right to be here. Richard interrupted gently. No, Mrs. Carter. You have absolutely no legal right to force entry into this property. Her confidence cracked for the first time. I was only protecting family assets. Richard opened the folder he had carried from the SUV. Interesting. He removed several photographs. Would you like to explain why you visited this building 7 times over the last 4 months? Her eyes widened. Frank stared at me. You've been recording everything? I nodded. Every visit. Richard continued. Would you like to explain why you hired a private investigator to learn who inspected this property? Another photograph. Another date. Another timestamp. Victoria's breathing became faster. I was just curious. Richard wasn't finished. Or why you secretly copied blueprints from Mr. Carter's office. Her lips parted. No words came out. The videographer quietly recorded everything. Every reaction. Every lie. Every moment. The crowd outside whispered among themselves. Victoria looked around desperately. This is ridiculous. She pointed toward the warehouse. Fine. If there's nothing valuable inside, open it. I'd love to see what you've been hiding all these years. I smiled. So would I. Frank looked confused. Boss, you've never opened the 6th floor for anyone. I know. You said no one ever could. I said no one had earned the right. Richard handed me a small brass key. For decades, it had remained untouched. I walked toward the freight elevator. The entire group followed. Victoria wore a satisfied smile again. She believed she had forced my hand. She believed victory was only minutes away. As the elevator climbed, no one spoke. The old cables groaned with every floor. First. Second. Third. Fourth. Fifth. Finally, the doors opened onto the 6th floor. At the end of the hallway stood the massive steel door. Victoria's eyes sparkled. That's it. She whispered. I knew it. I stepped forward. The key slid smoothly into the lock. For a brief moment, 40 years of memories flashed through my mind. Every sacrifice. Every lesson. Every reason I had protected this room. The lock clicked. I slowly pulled the heavy door open. Victoria rushed forward. Expecting millions. Expecting gold. Expecting the greatest treasure of her life. Instead, she froze. The room contained no money. No jewels. No fortune. Only rows of neatly organized shelves, filled with thousands of sealed boxes. Each one carefully labeled with dates. And names. Victoria frowned. What is this? I looked directly into her eyes. This, I said calmly, is the reason your life is about to fall apart. Victoria stared at the shelves in disbelief. No. She whispered. This can't be it. She walked from one row of boxes to another, her heels clicking against the polished concrete floor. Every box was identical. Every box was sealed. Every box carried a handwritten label. Some read 1987, Employee Relief Fund. Others 1993, Harbor Fire Families. 2001, Scholarship Trust. 2008, Veterans Assistance. 2017, Children's Cancer Foundation. She turned toward me, confused. Where's the money? Lead. You're looking at it. Her face twisted with frustration. Stop playing games. There has to be a vault. There has to be cash. There has to be something. Richard quietly placed another document on the table. There is. She grabbed it before anyone could stop her. Her eyes raced across the first page. Then the second. Then the third. The confidence disappeared from her face. What? This isn't possible. Richard spoke calmly. Every one of these boxes contains original legal records. Donation agreements. Property transfers. Trust documents. Tax records. Letters from families your father-in-law helped without ever telling anyone. Victoria looked at me as though she had never seen me before. You gave it away. For 40 years. You donated everything. Not everything. Enough. She shook her head. Nobody does that. I did. Frank lowered his eyes. Even he hadn't known. I had spent decades quietly helping people rebuild after disasters, paying for surgeries, funding scholarships, and keeping struggling businesses alive. Not once had I allowed my name to appear on a plaque or in a newspaper. The marina building had never been a treasure vault. It had been a vault of promises. Every document represented a life that had changed because someone received help when they needed it most. Victoria slammed the papers onto the table. So all those rumors. I never started them. But you never denied them. I nodded. People hear what they want to hear. She laughed bitterly. So there really isn't any fortune? I looked directly at her. Oh, there is. Her eyes lit up again. I knew it. But it's somewhere you'll never touch. Richard handed me one final envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside was the newest version of my estate plan. I updated this 6 months ago. Victoria frowned. 6 months. That was shortly after she had been caught searching through my office. I unfolded the document. My company. My investments. My homes. My personal accounts. They are all protected inside an irrevocable family trust. Richard continued the explanation. No beneficiary receives direct ownership. No spouse can claim control. No one can force a sale. No inheritance becomes personal property during a marriage. Victoria's face went pale. What does that mean? It means, Richard answered, that even if Daniel inherits everything one day, you legally control none of it. Silence. Complete silence. Then came the sentence that shattered every dream she had built. The only thing you could steal, Richard said, was an empty building. At that exact moment, one of the movers walked into the room carrying a small metal safe. Ma'am. He looked embarrassed. This is the only locked box we found downstairs. Victoria smiled desperately. There. I told you. Open it. Rick. Hard looked at me. I nodded. The safe was placed on the table. The combination was entered. The door slowly swung open. Inside, there was only a single white envelope. Across the front, in my handwriting, were 8 simple words. For the person who broke into this building. The room fell completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye was fixed on the white envelope lying inside the small metal safe. Across the front, written in my own handwriting, were the words. For the person who broke into this building. Victoria swallowed hard. She looked at me, then at Richard. Open it, she demanded. I shook my head. No. It's addressed to you. Her hands trembled as she reached into the safe. She carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream-colored paper. She unfolded it. The moment she began reading, the confidence vanished from her face. Richard quietly asked, "Would you like to read it aloud?" Victoria remained silent. Her lips refused to move. I looked at her calmly. Then I will. She tried to stop me. You can't. I wrote it. I gently took the paper from her hands. Then I began reading. If you're reading this, you've already proven that money means more to you than family. For decades, people believed this building contained my greatest treasure. They were right. But treasure isn't always measured in dollars. This building was never protected because of what was inside. It was protected to reveal who was willing to betray their own family for the chance of becoming rich. Today, you forced your way into private property. You hired a locksmith. You brought movers. You claimed authority you never possessed. Every step has been recorded. Every conversation has been documented. Every action has been witnessed. The fortune you hoped to steal never existed here. But the evidence of your greed certainly does. Congratulations. You unlocked the only thing hidden in this building. Your true character. When I lowered the letter, no one said a word. Even the seagulls outside seemed silent. Victoria's eyes filled with panic. This was all a test. I nodded. No. It was a choice. You made it. She shook her head violently. No. You manipulated me. I never asked you to break in. You made me think there was money. I never told you there was. You let people believe it. I let people believe whatever they wanted. Richard stepped forward and opened another folder. There is one final matter. Victoria stared at him. What now? He placed several printed photographs across the table. Security footage. Crystal clear. Victoria meeting the locksmith. Victoria directing the movers. Victoria instructing workers to load valuables. Victoria signing paperwork claiming authority she did not have. Then came screenshots of text. Messages recovered through legal discovery. Messages sent from Victoria to the private investigator. Find out what's inside. Whatever it costs. I'll own it soon anyway. The blood drained from her face. How? Richard answered calmly. The investigator cooperated after learning he had been hired under false pretenses. Victoria stumbled backward into a chair. She looked at Daniel's empty place beside her. Only then realizing he wasn't there to defend her. He wasn't there because he knew nothing. I quietly took out my phone. There was one unread message. From Daniel. Dad. Victoria told me she was shopping with friends today. I just finished my meeting. Want to have dinner tonight? I stared at the screen for several seconds. My heart felt heavier than it had in years. My son still believed he had a happy marriage. He had no idea it had already collapsed. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Then I looked at Victoria one last time. You didn't betray me today. You betrayed the only person in this room who truly loved you. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time. She wasn't crying because she had lost the fortune. She was crying because she finally understood. She had just lost everything else. The elevator doors opened with a metallic groan. Daniel stepped onto the 6th floor. He looked around in confusion. The witnesses. The attorney. The movers. His wife sitting in a chair with tears streaming down her face. And me. Standing quietly beside the table. Dad. His voice trembled. What happened? Nobody answered. Daniel walked toward Victoria. Victoria? She couldn't even look at him. He turned to Richard. Can someone please tell me what's going on? Richard handed him a folder. I think it's better if you see the evidence yourself. Daniel frowned. What evidence? He opened the folder. The first photograph showed Victoria standing outside the marina warehouse with the locksmith. His eyebrows tightened. The second showed her pointing toward the entrance. The third showed her instructing the movers. Then came the text messages. I'll own it soon anyway. Find every entrance. Don't tell Daniel. Daniel stopped reading. His hands began to shake. No. He whispered. He looked at Victoria. You told me. You were meeting your college friends. She covered her face. I can explain. No. You said you didn't even know where this building was. I was scared. Scared of what? She burst into tears. I thought your father was hiding millions. The words echoed through the room. Daniel slowly closed the folder. So? You lied to me. She reached for his hand. I did it for us. Daniel stepped backward. No. You did it for yourself. Silence filled the room. Then Daniel looked at me. His eyes were full of guilt. Dad. I'm so sorry. I walked toward my son and placed a hand on his shoulder. Yo. You have nothing to apologize for. I failed to see who she really was. No. You trusted the woman you loved. There is no shame in trusting. The shame belongs to the one who abuses that trust. Daniel lowered his head. I should have listened to you. I never warned you. You tried. I just didn't understand. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel looked directly at Victoria. Was any of it real? She couldn't answer. Our wedding. Silence. The life we built. Silence. Did you ever actually love me? Victoria cried harder than before. I don't know. Those 3 words shattered the last piece of Daniel's heart. He nodded slowly. I do. She looked up hopefully. I know exactly who you loved. It wasn't me. It was the life you thought I would inherit. Victoria collapsed back into the chair. The room remained painfully quiet. Richard finally broke the silence. There is one final document. He handed Daniel a sealed envelope. What is this? A letter your father wrote 5 years ago. Daniel looked surprised. For me? Yes. Open it. Daniel carefully unfolded the letter. As he read, tears filled his eyes. It said, Son, if you are reading this, it means someone has tried to divide our family with greed. Never measure a person's heart by the words they speak when life is easy. Measure it by the choices they make when money is involved. If that day ever comes, remember this, you will never lose by walking away from betrayal. You only lose by staying with it. Daniel folded the letter with trembling hands. He looked at me. Then at Victoria. Finally, he took a deep breath and said the words no one in the room expected to hear. I'll be filing for divorce. Victoria gasped. Daniel, please. But he didn't look back. Sometimes, karma doesn't arrive with anger. Sometimes. It arrives with the quiet footsteps of someone who finally chooses to walk away. 3 weeks passed after the incident at the marina. The warehouse doors remained locked. The rumors finally died. For the first time in 40 years, people stopped talking about hidden treasure. They had discovered something far more valuable. The truth. Meanwhile, Victoria's life was falling apart. The story of the attempted break-in spread quickly through legal and business circles. Although I never spoke publicly about it, the court records were enough to answer everyone's questions. The private investigator withdrew his services. The locksmith admitted he had been misled. The movers signed statements confirming they had been told the property legally belonged to her husband. One by one, every lie unraveled. Daniel moved out of the house they had shared. He rented a small apartment near his office. When people asked why the son of a wealthy businessman was living so simply, he gave the same answer every time. Peace is worth more than luxury. The divorce process. Eatings began quietly. Victoria hired an expensive attorney, hoping to claim part of the family fortune. But every attempt failed. The family trust had been created years before their marriage. The company wasn't personally owned. The properties couldn't be divided. Even the marina warehouse had been legally protected long before she entered Daniel's life. She walked into court expecting millions. She walked out with nothing she had chased. One rainy afternoon, Daniel came to visit me. We sat on the porch where we had spent countless evenings when he was a child. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Dad." "I'm embarrassed." I looked at him. "For what?" "I should have seen the warning signs." I smiled gently. "Love doesn't make people foolish. It makes them hopeful." He nodded slowly. "I keep asking myself if I failed." "You didn't. You gave someone your trust. They chose to betray it. That burden belongs to them, not you." Daniel looked toward the lake. "I've learned something through all of this." "What?" "Money doesn't reveal character. It reveals intentions." I couldn't help but smile. "You've learned the lesson I spent 40 years trying to teach." A week later, I received an unexpected visitor. Victoria. She looked completely different. The designer clothes were gone. The expensive jewelry had disappeared. For the first time since I'd met her. She looked ordinary. She stood quietly at my front gate. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I only wanted to apologize." I studied her face. There was no arrogance. No manipulation. Only regret. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I destroyed my marriage. I hurt Daniel. I betrayed your trust. And I lost everything." I answered calmly. "No." She looked confused. "You didn't lose everything. You lost what greed convinced you mattered most. But you still have one thing." "What?" "The chance to become someone better than the person who walked into that warehouse." Tears rolled down her face. She thanked me quietly and walked away. I never saw her again. Sometimes karma doesn't destroy a person forever. Sometimes it simply strips away every illusion until the only thing left is the truth. 6 months later. The marina warehouse looked exactly the same from the outside. Old. Quiet. Forgotten. But inside, something had changed forever. The shelves filled with donation records and family legacies had been carefully transferred to a secure historical archive. The building had finally completed the purpose it had served for 4 decades. One crisp autumn morning, I asked Daniel to meet me there. As we stood in front of the rusted entrance, he smiled. "I never thought I'd come back here." "Neither did I replied. Frank unlocked the gate one last time. The 3 of us walked through the empty warehouse. The echo of our footsteps filled the silence. When we reached the 6th floor, I handed Daniel the old brass key. He looked surprised. "Dad, this belongs to you." I shook my head. "No. It belongs to the next guardian." Daniel stared at the key resting in his palm. "I don't understand." I smiled. "For years, you thought this key opened a room. It never did. It opened a lesson." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I finally understand." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Your grandfather left me honesty. I leave you wisdom. Never build a family around money. Build it around character. Money can disappear overnight. But character is the only inheritance no one can steal." Daniel nodded quietly. "I promise." At that moment, Richard arrived carrying a thin folder. "It's time." Daniel looked confused. "Time for what?" Richard handed him the folder. Inside was the official document appointing Daniel as the new chairman and trustee of the family foundation. He looked at me in disbelief. "The foundation? You mean?" I smiled. "The real fortune." For 40 years, this family never measured success by how much we owned. We measured it by how many lives we changed. Daniel slowly turned the pages. Hundreds of scholarships. Medical grants. Emergency relief funds. Support for veterans. Homes rebuilt after storms. Thousands of families whose lives had quietly been transformed. None of it carried our family name. None of it sought recognition. Daniel closed the folder, unable to speak. I thought I was inheriting a business. You are. But you're also inheriting a responsibility. Outside, the afternoon sun shone across the marina. The same warehouse that had exposed betrayal would now become the headquarters of the family's charitable foundation. Its purpose had changed. Its legacy had not. As we locked the building for the final time, Daniel slipped the brass key into his pocket. What happens now? He asked. I smiled. Now. We stop protecting a building. And start protecting the values that built our family. We walked away together without looking back. Because the greatest revenge was never watching someone lose everything. It was proving that kindness, integrity, and patience would always outlast greed. And that is the law of karma. Betrayal may chase wealth, but in the end, character inherits the future.